take it as it is, that the Black Panther symbol became the symbol that was used by Huey Newton and by Eldridge Cleaver for the Black Panther Party in the Bay Area. So they, at that time, the young people from the Bay Area, i.e. Eldridge, Cleave, okay, let me get their names right. The young people from the Bay Area that were organizing the party that became the Black Panther Party came down to Lowndes County and helped work the elections there. And there was that relationship between the Bay Area folks and SNCC people, and I guess as a show of respect, they decided to adopt the Black Panther emblem from Lowndes County, Alabama, Freedom Democratic Party, as the emblem for the Black Panther Party. I went down and worked the elections. I had produced a publication for the Lowndes County folks called The Panther's Claw. And we took it to the end, but they liked it. So it was a compilation of newspaper articles that had been written around the country about the significance and importance of the Lowndes County freedom elections. So I compiled all of the papers. We received 20 or 30 publications at the SNCC office in the research department. So I clipped them and put them together in a format because we were able to produce publications at the SNCC office, which was a major piece of importance for our communications. There wasn't an internet then. You didn't have that kind of ability to communicate, so everything was done on paper. So I produced a sheet, a tabloid, called The Panther's Claw. And it was distributed in the county prior to the elections and at the mass meetings so that people could understand how people were seeing the significance of their work. And because I did that, I was able to go down to the county and write the columns for our publication, SNCC Newsletter. You want me to go on?
No, I have some more. So this is, before I get back into the other thing, what were the roles of women in SNCC? Because you don't always see the women on the front lines, so that you hear more of the men's names than the women's names. So tell me how.
Yeah. It's interesting you should ask that because Benny Ivy and I just finished doing a presentation down in Tunica, Mississippi, for a training session for new leaders in Mississippi. In that presentation, Benny and I explained, and the title of the presentation was The Role of Women in SNCC and Black Power. And we started off the presentation with saying, what was the role of women in SNCC during Black Power? We said the role of women was everything. Women were involved in every level of the leadership, every level of management, and also as major field organizers. So although we experienced, some sexual problem, I won't say that, let me start that again. We may have experienced some, we had to be tough, okay? Women had to be tough in SNCC, there wasn't any question about it. But we were respected, and our opinions were heard. We were the backbone of the organization, and we functioned at every level. And let me give you an example, because there's an important person named Ruby Doris Robinson who somehow is left out of the history of SNCC a lot of times because you hear so much about Rap Brown and Stokely Carmichael. But Ruby Doris was a student at the Atlanta University Center. She was from Atlanta. Her family was there in Atlanta. She was the first generation to go to college from her family. And she was one of the strongest women, or strongest leaders in SNCC that I knew. When I came to SNCC in '66, Ruby Doris was the executive secretary of SNCC. And if you understood the hierarchy, Jim Foreman was formerly the executive secretary, and he was a major force, and Ruby followed him as executive secretary. So I was just totally impressed with Ruby's strength of character. She was, Jack Minnis, one of the SNCC workers, said that Ruby Doris had a 100% correct radar, no, let me get it right. She had a 100% correct shit detector for trouble going on in the organization. You have to realize that the organization was quite large. We had maybe 100 people on staff at the time I came in. And Ruby Doris was able to keep everybody under control. In addition to our office at 360 Nelson Street, which was a warehouse in the warehouse district, our office was right up against the line of Black Atlanta and White Atlanta. And as the executive secretary, she managed all of the operations in SNCC. That included our motor fleet. We had a fleet of cars that had to be serviced regularly that were used by the field secretaries to do their projects. And it was called the Sojourner motor fleet, Sojourner being after Sojourner Truth. And there were about 7 mechanics in that shop. Her husband, Cliff, was one of those mechanics, but she managed the whole mechanical operation. She managed all the financing, she controlled all the communications. Everything that happened out of the central office, which was in Atlanta, was managed and controlled by Ruby Doris Robinson. She had an untimely death. She died maybe 2 years after I came to Atlanta, and it was a tragedy for all of us. I think most of us didn't get over it for a long time, but she truly was the Ella Baker of that era for us. So I want to lift her up as somebody that gets talked about in this documentary series for Atlanta. She was an Atlanta student. She went to Spelman College. She graduated from Spelman. She was a part of the Atlanta student movement, and then she became a full-time worker for SNCC. She brought her husband, Cliff, into SNCC. She had a son named Che, who I guess may still be somewhere in Atlanta, I'm not sure. But so the answer was we were everywhere. Okay, there wasn't anything we didn't do. Ethel Minor was the head of communications for SNCC when after Julian left to pursue his work as a Georgia Assemblyman. Then Ethel Minor came in and took his place. I was the research director at SNCC. Jack Menace was the man who was the research director prior to my coming. But I took over that function as research director. Faye Bellamy eventually became the second executive secretary. She was an Atlantean for many, many years, very strong woman from Philadelphia, who came and worked full-time for SNCC. Freddie Biddle, who you will interview later, was in charge of all the finance and bookkeeping, and ran made sure that all of our gifts were properly accounted for and did our internal revenue stuff. So Joyce Brown, another person in Atlanta now, ran the Watts line. And the Watts line was our way of keeping in touch with all of our field offices. At that time, you can remember there wasn't any internet, so the only vehicle we had to use for communications to make sure people were cool and that there wasn't anything happening to them there was to call them on the Watts line, or they called us on the Watts line. So Joyce managed all of that, all of the Watts line calls. So I could go on and on, but I want to convey to you that that SNCC was not an organization of males, okay? I'd say the spokespersons that appeared in the media were primarily men, but behind them, and actually beside them, not behind them, were women, strong African-American women who functioned at every level of the organization and were respected and treated with respect by the brothers and sisters who worked in SNCC.
Right. Now, and we briefly talked about this, but you can, expand.
Yeah, I'll do it.
Right. The Atlanta Inquirer, the paper founded by the ASM and edited by Julia Vaughn, still exists. How important was it as an intra-informational tool at the time?
When I came in '66, there were 3 African-American newspapers. There was the Atlanta Daily World, there was the Inquirer, and then there was the Atlanta Voice. The 3 of those publications, it was amazing just to be able to have 3 print newspapers coming out weekly or even biweekly or sometimes twice a week, and the Inquirer was among the ones that we read with regularity. I knew M. Carl Holman, who was one of the original editors at the Inquirer. He had since left the Inquirer and moved to Washington, D.C., and founded later the National Urban Coalition and was a part of the Civil Rights Commission. But he established the tradition, and I think Julian, had worked with the Inquirer. It was a paying job. SNCC didn't pay any money, so he had maybe 5 children at that point, and it was an important vehicle for him to be able to use because he was able to write about the things that he cared about and were important to him as a civil rights organizer. We read the Inquirer. I'm trying to think, there were probably some articles that we fed to the Inquirer from time to time because that was one of the functions I had as a research director. We had a news service set up called the Afro-American News Service. And we would produce materials about things that were happening in the field at the different offices, and then we would circulate them to the press and to the media. And I think that the Inquirer did use some of our pieces. Julian, of course, was there to write articles of significance about the struggle, and it was a wonderful vehicle for us to have there in that city. People were very fortunate to have that vehicle.
And then what was your